I think creating a culture of I don't know it all. I don't have all the answers. And it's okay to speak up. It's okay to make mistakes. And I think the other thing is I'm big on relationships. And so taking time to build relationships that get to the concern of the other person. And a lot of leaders talk about this, but I don't know that they all do it. People are so busy. I think taking time, having a skip level one-on-one and really being known and asking the other person to know the other person is really important, and demonstrating like I don't know it all. I don't have all the answers, because I think the leader has to lead by example in that regard and make it known that it's safe. What I found is as I did that for myself and as I work with others, the more that they engage with their employee, be known, know the other person, be vulnerable by sharing their mistakes and sharing what they don't know and leading with that, then the other person becomes much more comfortable doing it.
Hi, I'm Jeff. Welcome to the Impodsters, and I have our definition of the day. Through the lens of emotional intelligence, imposter syndrome becomes an opportunity for growth. Leaders learn to accept their doubts, seek constructive feedback, and build trust-based relationships that reinforce their value and their credibility. Our guest methods demonstrate that by elevating emotional intelligence, professionals can transform self-doubt into self-assurance and lead with greater impact, resilience, and authenticity. If you love what we're doing, follow us on social media everywhere and anywhere you get your favorite podcasts.
We are thrilled to welcome Bill Tingle to the Impodsters Podcast. Bill's a distinguished C-suite executive. He's a leadership coach, and he's a founder of Tingle Leadership with over 3 decades of international experience guiding organizations and individuals to new heights. He's renowned for helping technology professionals transition into influential leaders, transforming workplace cultures, and driving strategic innovation across industries. His background spans executive roles at companies like My Eye Doctor, Pods Enterprise Holdings. Bill brings a wealth of insight into what it takes to build high-performing teams and foster emotionally intelligent leadership, a term, I love that term. Get ready for an engaging conversation packed with actionable advice, personal stories, and expert strategies from one of today's leading voices in executive development. Holy cow. Welcome, Bill Tingle. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Johnny,
Absolutely.
Jeff, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
We are excited to have you on and excited to learn a little bit more with your background and your experience in building leaders. We love hearing in the field, real-time comments on what you're seeing in imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon with the people that you work with. So we've got some questions we want to launch right into. I'll start us off with one. And what I'd like for you to do, Bill, can you share a pivotal moment from your early career when you personally experienced imposter phenomenon, and how did it shape your approach to leadership and consulting?
Yeah, thank you for that. I grew up in the engineering realm. So I started out as a software engineer programming guidance software for cruise missiles. And I realized pretty early that I wanted to go into business. And so then the question was, how am I going to get from defense work into business? And I learned some technologies that were useful to the consulting firms at the time. And so, long story short, I got a job as a management consultant at one of the big 5 firms at the time. And so you imagine going from an engineer into a management consulting role. And I immediately thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? I don't know anything about what we're doing here. And so I don't think there wasn't a term, it wasn't called imposter syndrome back then, but that's what it was. And I just remember feeling very uncomfortable. And my father was an engineer, and he was always like, know your stuff, know how to do your job, and just do your job. And you go into consulting, and there's so much you don't know. And I can remember waking up in the middle of the night, just pacing the floor, like, what am I going to do? I don't know what I'm doing. And I talked to one of my mentors at the firm, and I learned pretty quickly that no one knows it all. And if we can get ourselves into an emotional state of curiosity, learning, openness, and in consulting, you can't tell people I don't know what I'm doing, even though you feel that way. But I learned quickly to recognize what I knew and what I didn't know. And I thought, you know what, I can figure this out, and I'll work hard, I'll learn, and I, quite frankly, I was successful in that, and that was, and I didn't have all the terminology for imposter syndrome or even emotional intelligence back then, but that's what was going on, and it turned out to be a really great experience for me early on.
I've got a little bit of follow up on that one. We've had some of the folks that we've had on. We've had some psychologists on, very well versed in imposter phenomenon, imposter syndrome, and there was a term that a couple of them actually got to, and it sounds like this is applicable to you. So I'll form this in a question. Several of the psychologists mentioned the concept of the other, that at any point when you feel as though you are an other in a situation, in a role, in a function, in a format, when you hear that term otherism or the other and how it relates to imposter syndrome, tell me a little bit about how that might translate to that story you just told us.
I haven't heard that term. So the other, is that like the other of me or the other of them?
Really, where you're stepping into an experience where you feel external, or you feel like someone other than the group, the role that you've never been in before, kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that's definitely the case. Feeling like the other on the outside, and almost like I'm going to get in trouble. Like this. There's this other person that is me, and and I, like I said, like I felt like I don't know what I'm doing. And I remember probably too much information. I went into the restroom, and the partner came up next to me in the restroom, and I was just scared. I'm like, I just felt like, I'm caving. And he looked at me and he says, "I understand you're doing a great job." And the weight of the world just kind of lifted off me. And I'm like, well, I'm sure glad that he said that. But yeah, I could see where that would be the case.
Yeah, my ears perked up too. You touched on a word that I think is just so huge when that's starting to settle in. You touched on curiosity, but whether or not you had enough emotional intelligence to put two and two together, like my curiosity might be enough, combined with my ability to get stuff done, or the desire to get stuff done, to push through. But am I the only curious one that likes getting stuff done in the room? And then, when you made that connection with someone that was able to go, we're all in the same boat, dude. That's so freeing, to where you feel like you can now function. Yeah. Very interesting.
I don't know if you've heard of Marie Forleo. You ever heard of her? She's an author, podcaster, and I heard her one day. I think she has a book. It's called "Everything is Figure-Outable," and I haven't read that book, but the title was just like, you know what? Everything is figure-outable, and that can be freeing to somebody that feels like an imposter. Like, you know what? I may not. I can figure this out. Just need time and help. And
well, Jeff, this kind of goes back to Kelso's breakdown of self-esteem versus self-efficacy, where Bill, we had a guest on the show, and I'll let Jeff kind of extrapolate a little bit more about that, but he basically framed it in the format that there's self-esteem, which is a feeling, an emotion, and fickle. But self-efficacy is more of an intellectual understanding of capabilities, and whether you've done the thing or not, you're able to figure it out, and that you've got the skill sets,
right,
even though you might have the direct ones, you have the ability to figure it out. So, Jeff, I'll let you add in on that.
Great. So I had a question as well. So in the tech professional space, which is where you came out of, and actually where I live as well, what are some of the most common ways you've seen imposter syndrome show up in those roles?
Yeah, one of the things is for technologists that go into leadership, I think that can be a real struggle, and because as a technologist, they feel like they need to know everything, and they need to know a lot. So if you're an engineer and your job requires you to understand design and test and development, build, you do need to have a lot of knowledge. And I think when technologists go into leadership from the very first time, they feel very vulnerable because they feel like they need to know everything. And so there's kind of two parts to that. They think they need to know everything about leadership, and it's new. And so they can get into the imposter syndrome, like, well, gosh, I'm a leader, but I don't feel like one because I have to learn. And then the other issue that they see them bump into is if a technologist becomes a leader over multiple areas, and some of those are not their background, they feel very inadequate. It's like, well, I've never been a network engineer. Like, how in the world can I lead? I feel like an imposter leading network engineering because I don't know. And so I think those are two areas where they can feel that way. And as I've worked with those people, I've worked with them to say, okay, if you're going to go into leadership, you get to declare yourself a beginner. Like, everybody knows this is you, it's your opportunity. You get to declare yourself a beginner. And when you declare yourself a beginner, then you can be in a mood of curiosity and wonder and passion about this new opportunity. And oh, by the way, as a leader, in most organizations, you don't need to know everything about the technology. That's what your team is for. And there's some things that I do with people to help them through that. And I think a lot of people that come out of engineering, they still have that doer mindset. Like, I'm a doer, and so
Yeah.
I have to understand everything. And it's like, actually, no, you don't. There's some things you need to do with your team, but you don't need to do that.
Yeah,
Well,
the difference between doer and leader, it's an incredible dynamic there. There's a complete shift when you understand the roles of those two things.
Yeah, and there's an important, I think, enmeshment that probably has to happen too of a hybrid role. Like you said, like they've got to immediately sort of start adopting leadership skills, which a lot of the reason some of these guys got into tech in the first place is because they want to be an individual contributor and they learn to write code and they don't have to deal a lot with, human resource issues and people that want to get promoted and develop a career path and the emotional side of leadership as well. And I've also seen it go the other way where it's the tech rules, my technical acumen is what's leading the department versus and the rest of the stuff sort of goes by the wayside. So yeah, I really appreciate
One of the things one of the things I experienced for myself early in my career was when I was an engineer, and then when I became a manager, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it. There's like things I didn't like about it. And I realized the reason I didn't like some of the things is I didn't know how to do it. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you don't know how to do something, it's no fun. And honestly, I think that is a pervasive problem in many corporate environments where companies are putting people into leadership positions. They're not getting the education and the development to be a leader. Some skills are they're natural, but leadership is a science and an art. And then when they don't build a competency, they don't like it. And then they think they don't like it because they're not natural at it. Well, once I learned how to be a manager and a leader in a corporate setting, I loved it. I love giving feedback because I knew how to do it in a caring way.
And I think I'm going to grab onto that because I think that's where, when I was reading your bio and your information, as I've kind of gotten to know you a little bit more, Bill, I keep seeing emotional intelligence come up. And as you heard in the beginning, every episode of the Impodsters, we do a definition of imposter syndrome. Can you give us a definition of what emotional intelligence is.
Yeah, and what I want to do is not give you the Daniel Goleman definition, if it's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, emotional intelligence begins with an awareness of what emotions are and how they affect us. And so one of the things that I say in my practice is that, and by the way, I put emotions and moods together, and not many people do that. They're different, but I put them together. And so emotions are a predisposition for action. And some people say emotion is energy in motion. And so whatever we have an emotion, we always have emotions, but whatever our emotion is predisposes us to a certain action. And now that action could be positive or negative. So if I have and some people don't like to say positive and negative emotions, I say it because of the actions they lead to. So if I have a negative emotion, then that can predispose me to take a negative action. And it could be how I treat it could be laying in bed all morning. It could be how I treat people. And if I have a positive emotion, that predisposes me to a positive action. And so to me, emotional intelligence is number one, being aware and noticing the emotion, naming it, understanding its power to lead to action, and then the ability to shift it. And a lot of people are stuck in their emotions because they don't know that they can shift it. And underneath an emotion is a story and a self-assessment. And so for me personally, I can be aware of my emotions, the power of the actions that it can lead me to take, and the ability to shift those. And then also when I see it in others, I can be influential in recognizing their emotion, being a participant, helping them to shift theirs and help them as they're going through it as well. And so to me, that's sort of a big part of the essence of how I think about emotional intelligence.
That's great.
That's powerful. I think I've got a follow-up on that one. Do you find that you spend a lot of your time as you're doing training untraining people in some of the old-fashioned leadership mindsets of, eliminate the human, show no flaws, show no vulnerability, emotion is bad in business? Do you find yourself working on a lot of undoing and untraining?
Depending on the generation that I'm working with. And so, yeah, I think if I'm working with, and I hate to stereotype or categorize, but the fact is, it's biological that we all have generations, right? And so if I'm working with somebody that might be in like a boomer or Gen X, then there could be some undoing. And sometimes it's like impossible to undo it. Like it's so wired in their nervous system that all I can do is help create an awareness around it.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I think if you look at maybe millennials and Gen Zs, I think there's a much more openness and awareness to feelings and a willingness to shift. One of the things that we talk about, we talk a lot about learning, and you think, well, wait, why do you talk about learning? It's like we all went to school, we learned how to learn, but there's so much about adult learning that isn't covered in school or even in corporate programs. And one of the things that we talk about that it's tied to emotions is we call, it's not my term. I don't know who came up with it, but it's friends of learning and enemies of learning. And yeah. And, enemies of learning it's like, there's an emotion attached to an enemy of learning. And one might be, I have to know it all.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is, I don't want to admit I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a lot of people, they're stuck in these emotions that are really like enemies of learning. And I think that can really impact imposter syndrome, because if you feel like an imposter and you're living with these enemies of learning, then you're going to be stuck, and so those emotions have you stuck, and you're not going to break out of that and be open to learning. Because I think for me, a big part of imposter syndrome is shifting your emotion and your mood to one of openness and curiosity and a willingness. I don't know it all, and that's what's called a friend of learning. I don't know it all, and I need other people's help.
Yeah. It's an implicit vulnerability there that you have to get really comfortable with. I'd say as well, once that comes up.
There's that V word that keeps popping up in our conversations, huh?
Yep. Yeah. And
and I think that's one of the reasons there's so much talk about psychological safety, is because I think people want to be able to say how they feel and what's going on so that they can start relating and building trust with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think when there's no psychological safety and people are afraid to say anything, then I think it's surely not going to help imposter syndrome.
Sure, or they're terrified of failure, or that if what I say is leading to a failure, versus fail fast. I expect you to fail fast. I want to create that environment of the quicker you fail, the quicker we learn and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, Jeff, that leads me to I hadn't thought about this in 20 years. I remember a story when I was at Enterprise Holdings. There was I sensed there was a little bit of fear of making mistakes and fear of failure that was creeping into the culture, and in technology, you can't have that. You gotta fail fast. You gotta learn.
Totally.
And so we had a town hall meeting, and I said, and I had a plant. I had somebody that was willing to do it, but I said, all right, we're going to start raising our hand and celebrating our failures. And so who made a mistake this week? And, my plant stood up and said, I brought down the system on Monday because I ran something manually and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, all right, let's give it up. Let's give it up. And it became a ritual. And like I said, look, I don't want people making mistakes to get applauses, but I want to be able to make sure that we are celebrating and we can learn from each other when you make mistakes. And there was no terminology, psychological safety back then, but that really did create that. I mean, that whole, it's okay, let's learn from each other.
Yeah. And, I think that also, besides the safe place to fail, I think everybody moves forward a lot quicker. And I think too, you start attracting a certain type of individual too that's willing to just do trial and error for the sake of learning, for themselves and for the sake of the team. So I think that's such a powerful, just broad initiative you can put into the organization is, hey, fail fast. There's no recourse if that happens. In fact, we encourage it. Number one. And then secondarily, you touched on something too about, it sort of goes into like the other thing, but that perspective. And I remember seeing this, I think it was actually, one of Steve Jobs' quotes, which was, you live in a world where everything that you touch or interact with was created by someone else. It was their idea. It was they had to walk into a room and explain it, get it pitched, and people laugh them out of the room or whatever it was. But I think that goes a lot hand in hand with what I see in the technical space. I think most people are creatives that get into that technical space because they do want to create things. But when it comes to whether it's going to be in leadership or whatever. But one of my questions is related to, if we agree devs are creative, do you see any sort of a correlation with the creative mindset and imposter syndrome at all?
Oh boy, I'm not sure about that. I haven't thought much about that. I think that's a great question. I think there could be people that have that creative mindset that might feel like their creation's not good enough.
Yeah.
I was so I play guitar. So when I was younger, I wanted to be a professional musician. I know both of you are musicians. And my father was a chemist. He was an engineer. And he's like, well, I recommend you get an engineering degree, not do that. And one of the things that he drilled into me was you can always do better. And so one of the things, like, I thought, okay, so when I play my guitar, I can always do better. It's never good enough. And that served me well when I was younger. But then as I got older, I didn't know this, but my subconscious mind was, it's not good enough. You can always do better. And so I brought creativity to work. And at work, when I was expressing my creativity, even in leadership, I didn't know it, but this whole thing, I can always do better, which was like a core belief, led me to at times feel like an imposter, because if I can always do better, then I'm not good enough. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
so it's never ending.
That's how I'm tying that together.
Yeah. So here's a question on that, and I think we've touched a little bit on this. The is that a bug, or is that the code? Is it a symptom, or is it the underlying thing? If you think through those experiences that you had, and let's say creativity is an urge, is that urge rooted in a cycle of getting that validation you need? Is it possible that the thing that creates that creativity in the first place, especially in people with pathological level of self-doubt, imposter syndrome, is it possible that is actually a side effect that is caused by a validation cycle?
I think that's quite possible. I do think that's quite possible. Yeah. I think all humans are born creative. And, some people will say, oh, I'm not a creative person. It's like, well, you're a human being. You are a creative person. The question is, what does that mean to be a creative person? But I think for me, wanting to be creative, and whether it's to like just be the best creator I can for the purpose of life, or to get the attention of others. And then believing that, well, it's not good enough no matter what I do. So I'm afraid to do it because it's not good enough, or it won't be good enough or accepted.
Yeah. And that might stifle a lot of like things that we could enjoy, whether it's a product at a company, or, getting to work a lot on the tech side for enabling songwriters, right, to get paid. I always look at what a miracle it is that they had the guts to write down what they were thinking and feeling, then set it to music, and then share it with someone else. And then somebody was like, you should share this with lots of people. And then, and just literally the risk, I think, too, that sets in of like, okay, I just put out what I think, what I feel, and how good I am at it. And this could apply to anything, whether it's a song or a product launch or something. I think you have to be willing to see, like, some people just aren't going to like it, or they're not going to understand it. And there's a part of things that are always going to be subjective. And I think with imposter syndrome, that subjective side of ourselves are immediately can stifle that says it's completely up to you whether or not this is successful. Not get it out there and let's let people decide and be ready for feedback or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Jeff, that reminds me of a story I heard. I saw I think it was a documentary on Eric Clapton, and I remember Eric Clapton was talking about how when he was pretty young, when he became famous, and at heart he was a blues player, and so he thought, in order to be a great blues player, you gotta pay your dues and play for a long time, and play in a lot of smoky bars, and like you gotta pay your dues.
Right.
And his situation led him to be able to play big time early. And he didn't say this, but I believe in his deep down soul, he felt like an imposter, like he wasn't ready to do it. But he was forced in there. And I mean, I think the world's thankful that like somebody pushed him to get out there early, right?
Yeah. How lucky are we?
What is it?
Yeah, that they put that out there, and then the world goes, yeah, that's amazing. Go ahead, Johnny. Sorry.
Yeah. I think the converse of that is the Beatles story. They, Hamburg, Germany, at a strip bar, that was the only job they could get, and they had to play like session after session after session after session after session, and that's how the Beatles became the Beatles. But Your example is kind of interesting because the first question that popped into my head was, did he come from a blue collar background? And there's some things, especially for someone that focuses on leadership. And you mentioned the term doer.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from a blue collar background, my dad was a doer. He could do anything. He could build anything. He was a great leader in the military up to a certain point, but he was still, I think that doer piece is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you feel, or have you seen examples, especially, and let's look at the blue collar piece of it, for the people that you've coached that have come through blue collar backgrounds? Do you see them almost having guilt because they're not turning the wrench? They're not, hammering the nail. They're not doing the thing, and they can't transition out of that into leadership.
Yeah, I have seen that. Especially in terms of work ethic, for sure, like hard work. It's interesting because Tim Ferriss wrote a book, 4-Hour Work Week. Yet there's people from that back like, no, I got to work 60 hours a week. I got to work hard. And I do think that there are definitely people that they it's like, yeah, I've got to work hard and I've got to do the work. And I can see some people that have come from that background, where that's sort of it's a virtue, right?
Yeah, I can relate to part of that too, being raised, basically military, blue collar family. And then as I started diving more towards into like corporate operations, corporate technology, leadership ranks, next thing I know, I'm around blue bloods from Vanderbilt. And I'm immediately like, I am not one of these people, these last names, these family estates and homes. And I really struggled.
The third.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I got a guy that's the fifth. One of my best friends still to this day. He's the fifth. And funny story, side note, he has a twin brother. And I was like, hey, so you like the sixth? And he goes, no, my name's Brent. And I was like, I would just assume like you would give them all the title anyway. That I think that's where I first started feeling major imposter syndrome. I'm like, do I need to go like back to school, or is there a certain way to dress? Is there a certain like speech to adopt? Because it was all very, very different. And I think honestly, in that same way, the amount of emotional intelligence and willingness to get it done and curiosity, I think that in a way to the blue bloods, and it's funny if they hear this, they're going to know exactly who they are. That other skill set was valuable to them. You know what I mean? Like to them, it's like, it was almost like, can we get to some diversity of thought in here, please? Of someone who works just as hard, is just as curious and just as smart, but he's got a very different, maybe very different mindset and point of view on those things. And but I didn't see it as valuable at all to myself. And so sometimes, again, I think it's just going to be about how do you work through that. And until I shared some of that with a leader and he was able to normalize and get some like representation with you, and that's so I can totally relate to the background telling you you're in the wrong spot, man. You don't belong with these people.
One of the
another go ahead.
One of the things that we work with is we have our identity from the past. So we have our identity with our family, with how we grew up, with our experiences, with our past mistakes. And one of the things that we work on is creating an identity, like creating a new identity. And people talk about, oh, I'm going to reinvent myself. Well, the nice thing about being a human is you can do that, right? You have the brain and its neuroplastic capabilities, and we're always creating new brain cells, and we can shape and mold that. It's really possible to create a new identity and be authentic, right? So I can imagine where some people might feel like they're an imposter if they're creating an identity and they're not owning it, like they're trying to be somebody. But if you do the work to create an identity that is authentic, and it's your story, and you're owning it, and you're feeling it, and you have a narrative around it, and you're acting ethically with it, that you can create an identity and portray that authentically.
That's great. I had another question.
I love that concept. And
Go ahead, Johnny.
No, you're up.
So with all this, can you because we're talked a lot about leaders. Some leader kind of tapped us and we're like, "You're fine. Let's okay." Do you have a real world example that you're comfortable sharing where you helped a team member or maybe an individual or someone that was around you overcome the imposter, so to speak, and start becoming more confident or settled into, I think you were saying, an identity or a persona that they were really comfortable with and knew was valuable?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the one that comes to mind is I only heard part of that, Jeff. So I think I know what your question was. I had a leader who came from software development and had an engineering education, but came really entire career with software development. And she was going to run a large part of infrastructure, and she was very she wanted to do it, but she was very uncomfortable with it. And she was afraid what other people would think, and they would, people would think that she didn't know what she was doing. And there was some rumbling, people like, what does she know about infrastructure? And some of the engineers and so what I said to her is like, look, our chief operating officer told this to me at one point in time, is like, leadership is fundamental, and the ability and opportunity to run a new area that you don't know as much about. What a great opportunity. You have an opportunity to learn something new. You have an opportunity to bring some of the disciplines from software engineering into the infrastructure space, because more and more back then, the infrastructure was becoming software. You got a great project management background. You can bring that. We need better project management skills on the infrastructure side. And you know what? You have an opportunity to go into the trenches side by side and let these people teach you what they're doing. And they're going to respect you when you let them tell you what they're doing and you're learning from them. You're going to build trust and respect, and you're going to build a relationship with them. And after about 6 weeks of her doing that, I got these great feedback about her. She had all these ideas to help the team. She was listening to the team. Once she went into the trenches and spent time with them, she understood conceptually what they were doing. I mean, she had an engineering background. It wasn't like she couldn't make an interpretation. And once she, probably about 6 to 8 weeks in, like, she was a different person. She went from huge imposter syndrome to confident, comfortable, and really her mood went from sort of despair and concern to just passion and curious about everything that was ahead of her. And she did a great job.
That's
and cool. I think there's inside of that story, there's this magical capability of leaders and mentors to reach in and twist the lens a little bit, to reframe the thinking. There's so much of it that's a story in our head that we're telling to ourselves. To reframe that story, that's such a powerful capability for really any leader. And Bill, as a leader of leaders, as a mentor of mentors, can you share with us an example where someone did that for you?
Yeah, and it's a similar story. So when I was at Enterprise Holdings, I was running, I think at the time, so I was running all of application development for global operations at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And there's a really cool backstory. We don't have time for this, but it was early internet, like early kind of World Wide Web, and e-commerce was becoming bigger and bigger with like web services and industry portals and, companies that were connecting with each other. And especially in the insurance replacement space, car rental insurance replacement, there was a lot of threats out there. A lot of companies were trying to get in the middle and get pieces of the pie. And so we just, as a company, we decided to create a separate entity that was going to build out all these new capabilities. And it was really cool because we got to go off site in this new space and bring everybody together. Well, I was asked if I wanted to do that, and it was the chief operating officer. I said, like, we'd like for you to do it. And I'm thinking, holy cow, what do I know about that? And I just totally felt inadequate. And he said, Bill, leadership is fundamental. He's like, we have people all over the company that go run things they've never run before. And I know your leadership capabilities. You can go do this, and you're going to have all the support you need. And honestly, looking back, once I got over that and went and did it, it was probably the most fun I've ever had in my career. Like, just everything that we did. Yeah.
That's incredible.
That's cool. And I like where you talk about it being fundamental and foundational, like basically plug and play with the leadership skills into that next thing or this other thing. And you can apply those and be successful, whether you know all the details or, if you may be in charge of the shipping operation, but never set foot in the warehouse once on your way up through the ranks. That's cool perspective for a lot of people to have, I think, too, that are looking to, maybe one of the ways I can get over imposter syndrome is invest in leadership training, to learn that I can just go apply that when I learn it anywhere else.
Yeah, it's almost a play on the self-efficacy thing that, leadership is fundamental. I love that quote. But it's almost a statement, a manifestation of the concept of there's a certain level of self-efficacy that just applies everywhere. And even though you may not know the topic material or the technology, or you might not understand software or whatever the thing may be, that's not really the important part. The important part is the fundamental pieces of it, and that really just goes to self-efficacy. But there was something early on that I wanted to kind of pull us back to, because we've talked on the show about safety, and we've talked about vulnerability and some of the requirements of leadership to really instill both of those things. But what I'd never really done is I'd never connected them quite together like I did in the way you were commenting on it, Bill. And so I saw really that necessity for safety and vulnerability to kind of live together. What are some of the tools, and maybe this is a two-part question, but what are some of the tools when you talk to leaders, what do you try to arm them with on here's how to maybe start with the self, feel safe, and be vulnerable? But then the flip side of that is, and then how do you train that out to your team? What are some of the tools that you use in your program?
Yeah, I think creating a culture of I don't know it all. I don't have all the answers. And it's it's okay to speak up. It's okay to make mistakes. And I think the other thing is I'm big on relationships. And so taking time to build relationships that get to the concern of the other person. And I think a lot of leaders talk about this, but I don't know that they all do it. People are so busy. I think taking time, having a skip level one-on-one and really being known and asking the other person to know the other person is really important, and demonstrating like I don't know it all. I don't have all the answers, because I think the leader has to lead by example in that regard, and make it known that it's safe. Because what I found is as I did that for myself, and as I work with others, the more that they engage with their employee, be known, know the other person, be vulnerable by sharing their mistakes and sharing what they don't know, and leading with that, then the other person becomes much more comfortable doing it, and actually much more comfortable reaching out proactively. So I don't know if that gets to what you're talking about, but that's what comes to mind as you talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, that's, it sort of brings me to a different question. Jeff had mentioned something about leadership training, and there's a lack of it out there. I would say that's been my experience. And if we say leadership is fundamental, then, that's sort of the what is leadership training? It's fundamental training in many ways. And I guess, what is it that really pushes us towards technical training or tactical training or any of that training that seems to make up the corpus of most training? And then when you look at what are we training fundamentals, we kind of don't touch that. Do you have a theory as to why that is?
I do. I think that comes from tradition. I think it comes from the labor tradition or the industrial, second industrial revolution, maybe part third industrial revolution. And I think all the history of management theory and leadership, it's all important. But there was a time at which things didn't move as fast. We defined business processes and it didn't change a lot. So, okay, here are the things you need to do in leadership. When this happens, you do this, and this. And so it was a lot of the practices were more like, okay, more prescriptive, if you will. And what my view on this is we're way behind. And I have a leadership program that I've delivered at some major companies, and the outcomes that I'm seeing is really incredible with what I'm seeing. And what we're doing is we're not like one company, major corporation that I delivered leadership development. They have all the traditional leadership development. They have all the management. They deliver that. But when I showed them what we had, they like, well, I've never seen that before. And it's because it's fundamental. And when people first work with me, they're like, how do I apply this? Like it feels like really theoretical at first. But the reason it feels theoretical is because it's fundamental. And when something's fundamental, you have to design with it. Right. So when we talk about using language to coordinate action, or we talk about moods and emotions and how they predispose us and how to shift them in others, or we talk about crafting narratives and like not just telling stories, but like what's the design of a narrative and how does that narrative need to be designed to compel other people to action? It's everything in our program begins with who we are as an observer. And so we're observing what's going on. And then as we observe what's going on, then we design our actions. And most of the actions in a corporation are language. Like if you follow a CEO around all day, what are you going to notice? They're going to talk, right? And when they're talking, there's only 5 or 6 constructs that they're using. I mean, if you really analyzed them, they'd be, that CEO just made a declaration. Oh, they just made an assessment. Oh, that was an assertion. Oh, they made a request. Oh, they just made a commitment. And there's only so many things. But for people, it's all just talk. And so what we do is we work with the fundamentals around language, moods, emotions, and then from there, it just explodes into all these tools and techniques that you can design with based on the fundamentals of what it is. And in some ways, it's kind of like a first principles approach. But anyway, so yeah, I don't see a lot of it out there. And I think that's one of the reasons I feel like I've got this sort of uncommon offer.
That's cool. I really like the breakdown of they're going to basically say one of 5 things, agnostic of how long they spoke. It was one of these. Really interesting stuff.
So one of my favorite authors is Kurt Vonnegut. There's actually a video out there of him, and he basically makes the assertion, I think there's 7 plots that exist, all the books, all the literature in time. And he actually goes up to a board and he says, and we can plot these all out. And he does an XY axis and he goes through, I think the first one is boy meets girl, boy loses girl. And he's doing, and it really follows, a lot of it's the hero's journey concept, and there's pieces and parts of it. But I don't know that I've ever thought through, those 5 simple steps as a framework to look at the way you put your message out into the world, especially if you're a leader, the amazing impact that has. You could tap the rudder on something that you're not knowing you're tapping the rudder on, send a company in a completely different direction. And you use that term language. And I think that's another one of those fundamental concepts that it's kind of hard to talk about. When you talk about language, I want you to dig into that a little bit more, because you're not saying words. This isn't words that we're talking about. It's something that comes from the words. That's a very human experience. Give us another explanation of language.
Yeah, there's different perspectives on that I could share. And when I talk about language, and I'm not talking about, English, French, Spanish, German. I'm talking about language as action, and all, majority of action in business is language. And so when I talk about language, first of all, there's language we do to ourselves, like we're talking to ourselves all day long, chit chat, and quite frankly, when people are talking to themselves, when they start making self-assessments and treating them like fact, because there's two language constructs that we talk about. One is assessments, and the other is assertions. Assessments are judgments, and assertions are facts that ground the assessment. And one of the things that people do with themselves is they're thinking quietly, making a self-assessment, like, oh, I'm stupid. I'm stupid for doing that. And then they treat, and children can do this, and we got to really be careful with our children. Oh, I'm stupid for doing that. And then all of a sudden, that self-assessment that's not grounded with an assertion becomes the fact. It becomes the assertion. And they're treating the self-assessment like it's a fact. And it's like, oh, I'm stupid. And it's like, well, wait a minute. No, is that true? Like, what's your, and so then so that's the inner world with language. And then the outer world is within, we make assessments of other people and situations. We use language to gather evidence and observations and make assessments. And in performance management, we want to gather assertions or evidence to ground our assessments of employee performance. And so that's part of the language is assessments and assertions. And then the other part of language is, and I do some workshops on this, where you can really tighten up the efficiency of people working together. And so if you think about delegation is language. And yet so many people talk about bad delegation or issues delegating. And when you use the language construct of a request makes sure that what does done look like? What does done look like? When is it due? What time zone? What's all the background context? And then the person who's receiving the request says, oh, okay, I commit to doing that. I'm telling you, I commit to doing it the way you said. I know what done means. I'll have it done by this time. And then it becomes a contract. And some people are like, man, that's just so much rigor. It's like, isn't that over the top? Mm-hmm. But when I've taught my organizations how to do that, and I've got people to work that way, there's the cost of leadership goes down because I don't have to babysit. It's like, you made a commitment. You know what it means.
Yep.
Like, we're good. And if you don't keep your commitment and you don't renegotiate it, there's a consequence. Doesn't mean you're going to get fired. Just means we're going to have a conversation. I thought you made a commitment. Like, your integrity is on the line, because now I have to follow up with you. And, one of the organizations, we got to the point where when people said they were going to do something, it was done. And if they couldn't, they knew to renegotiate. And it wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect, but the whole delegation and commitment, request and commitment, and we got really good at it. And rework went down, quality went up, waste went down, trust went up. Because when people don't keep commitments with each other, trust goes down.
Yep.
There's so many advantages of doing this well, and it's all language.
I love it.
Wow.
It reminds me in a way. I took a logic and reasoning class in college, where it was read this statement and boil it down, not into the words of what it was saying, but assign what that was. And it was in a really similar fashion. And I remember what I was going to say now earlier, which was, yeah, how do we apply that really then to ourselves? Or I think we can apply it to lower levels for the sake of increasing efficiency if people can learn how to dig the same kinds of things out of what someone's really saying. Or did they communicate that properly? And I think at times it's the difference between communication or moving information, where the question that I heard you saying, did you communicate X? And then to me, then the next question is, did you communicate it in the way that we've trained how to communicate commitments, issues, renegotiation? Like, did you put it through that same vehicle? And if you didn't, you're kind of out of compliance. You're sort of out of process. But I love how simple and brass tacks it brings it down to. And to me, that's almost like a playbook. That's coachable and repeatable. So kudos. That's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, so much of miscommunication. Bill, you used the language and talked a little bit about English, French, German. In the language of accountability and the language of leadership, people show up with, a Tower of Babel level of their own personal interpretations of language. And so it's fascinating that what you're doing is you're teaching them almost a sub-language. It sits inside the language. And it's really a format that just gets everybody on the same page, which oftentimes is where communication just completely goes awry. Is I say one thing and people hear it 5 different ways.
Semantic.
And that...
Yeah, one thing about that, I talk a lot about shared understanding. And like when people say, hey, are we aligned? Or are we on the same page? And they're talking about like their physical things, alignment and a page. But at the end of the day, it's like, do we have the same understanding? And like this whole we're going to go back and forth until we're pretty certain we have a shared understanding. I have something else, if it's okay, I want to throw out because I had never thought of this before. And I'm going to throw this out there and see how it lands. And this is, so when we talked about commitments and imposter syndrome, I never thought about this before. I think there's something to this where we always make commitments to ourselves, right? So we make a promise to ourselves all the time. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to stop eating ice cream every night. I'm going to, right? And so we make these commitments and promises to ourselves. And I think there's something to when we break our promises to ourselves, does that create some sort of deep imposter syndrome with ourself?
Yeah.
Like if I say I'm going to do something, I don't do it. Is there something going on there? Like I'm an imposter to myself because I said I was going to do it and I'm not doing it. So I don't know if there's something to that, but surely.
I think it brings anxiety, which then fuels that greater thing. And we were talking about I think there's the cycle of I didn't do enough, I'm going to do better, which eventually leads us into high functioning places. But I think there's the downward one too, which is you didn't do what you said you were going to do. You're awful. Now you're even worse. And that might kick off probably that downward one of not fulfilling something, particularly if we're branded with high energy and ability to take lots of things on and we made a commitment but missed. Or we build something for a client or something and it misses. Boy, that can kick that off. So I think it's whatever's going to kick off that negative response versus the validated response. I think that's an excellent insight.
Bill, I think you mentioned that external safety and trust that gets built when accountability is constant between two parties, leader and led, manager and managed. But I found that thought you had somewhat fascinating because what happens when we break the accountability with ourselves? What level of trust does that create internally that could very easily turn into imposter syndrome, where we realize that we just can't trust ourselves when we say we're going to go to the gym, or we're going to write the book and get it published, or whatever the thing that we're not doing is.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like that same application of external and team is actually true for the internal component of it as well.
I think so. Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
I think when we break our commitments to ourselves, which, I mean, we all do that, but I think when we do that consistently, we're teaching ourselves that we can't trust ourselves. And what's really going on deep down when that's going on? Like even your self-esteem or your confidence, or it's like, I just, to me, there's so much going on there that we don't know.
Well, I think this will be probably our last question, and it could probably be something we spend an entire show talking about. But I want to go back to something you mentioned about you used the word children, and it was really you were juxtaposing two different sort of conversations, and you mentioned something about the thought, the narrative in our head that triggers imposter syndrome. I'm not good enough. I'm not strong enough. But then you juxtaposed it by saying, we do that with children, and the assumption there would be as adults, we don't. But one question I would have there is really around that narrative. It gets taught into you typically as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of theories that say once that gets taught, there's a stunt that occurs, and it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of emotional intelligence to actually unlock that piece of it, to allow that child component of your psyche, of your fundamental development, to grow into the adult. And I guess one question, the question there would be, in your leadership program, can you touch on that? Do you touch on that? Or is that something that is so inaccessible, so fundamental, that the second you start talking about inner child, like, you lose your audience? What's been your experience on that one? We'll close with that.
Yeah, I'd sure like to talk more about that. I will occasionally talk about, as a coach, I will occasionally ask questions about childhood. If I feel that it's going to be safe and productive for my client. And sometimes I'll ask questions about, what did you think about what your father used to say to you? Like, or what would tell you, or, and I would come at it from the place of like stories, narratives, emotions, moods. I would never cross the line into psychotherapy or any sort of therapy, because I'm not trained for that. But I will sometimes ask that question, but I really look for their stories and their beliefs, because that reveals a lot about what's going on in their childhood. And there's there's some great exercises that I could go into around core wounds, core fears, core beliefs. I don't do that. It's not part of my practice, but I think, so often as a child, especially up till the age of 7, we're just a sponge taking everything in, and I think a lot of times parents are saying things to protect the kids, to help the kids. And maybe it's helpful as a child, but then as an adult, it's not helpful. And so there are times I'll ask, what their belief is, or what story they hold about that, or, tell me a little about, what did your parents say about that? And, I'm always careful with it, but there have been a couple times when it's been like magic. I ask a couple questions and you can just see like the person's just set free from this story that they've been gripped in. And it really does feel like magic in the moment when it happens. And they did it, but it was the questions that I asked and the path that we went down. But yeah,
that's great.
That's good stuff. And I love your response was perfect. I wish that we could talk about it more. I wish that I could talk about it more. That is, to me, that is so telling. That is almost an indictment on some of the fundamentals that we've been trained along the way that doesn't allow us to do that. So, Bill, thank you for sharing today.
Thank you for having me.
It's been really insightful talking on items like language and what that actually means and the structure of language. To our listeners, I would say go to tingleleadership.com and just look at some of Bill's work. And also, if you go to Modern CTO, you can find it on YouTube. There's an interview that is How Effective Communication Drives Leadership that I recommend everyone go find that out. But Bill, thank you so much for joining the Impodsters. We're glad you're here. We appreciate your vulnerability and the knowledge and wisdom you imparted with us.
Thank you, guys.
Definitely.
It was a pleasure. All right.
Absolutely.